Welcome to a new episode of Alternative Perspective. This is a very important episode. In this episode of Alternative Perspective, we are going to understand the relation between defeasible logic and fake news. Well, fake news are based on what is known as defeasible logic. What is defeasible logic? That is something which we are going to explore in this episode. Also remember, the fake news are as such not important things. However, the fake news are planted with a motive, with an objective. We need to figure out the objective or motive behind a particular fake news. That is the most important aspect. Also understand the fake news peddlers and the so-called fact checkers are part of a team. They work as a team. They're part of the same team. Watch this episode of Alternative Perspective in order to get your perspective right. Remember that at the time of this pandemic, the fake news became a huge problem and they were planted with a particular motive. In this episode of Alternative Perspective, we are going to explore these motives. Fake news are planted by people with vested interest. Fake news are planted in order to divert the attention of masses, in order to destroy or sabotage the credibility of someone or something very important which hurts people with vested interest. Fake news are planted in order to subvert or divert the discourse, debate or discussion from something important and legitimate to something that can be nullified or defeated at a later point of time. Fake news are based on defeasible logic, that is a logic or reasoning that can be defeated at a later point of time by the so-called fact checkers. Fake news peddlers and so-called fact checkers are part of the same team. Together, they form a formidable force whose main objective is to wage an information warfare against the masses. The main aim of information warfare is to induce cognitive dissonance among the masses. This has serious psychological impact. I am now going to explain this fake news concept using some schematic diagrams. Let us assume that authentic people or good guys initiate a debate, discussion or discourse. This debate, discussion or discourse has many statements, statement 1 up to statement n. As a result, people with vested interest or the fake news peddlers get hurt. Naturally, they would react. People with vested interest or the fake news peddlers would react by inserting or incorporating a defeasible logic or a defeasible reason or a falsehood or a big lie among the sequence of statements. This statement is shown as statement F, a false statement, a falsehood. People with vested interest would then build a false narrative or falsehood or false discussion based on this defeasible logic which they themselves have planted. This false premise would be allowed to go on for a while, and mainstream media and social media would be used to divert the attention of the masses to this falsehood or false propaganda or false premise. Once people with vested interest understand that the focus of the masses have been shifted to this false narrative or falsehood, the next step would begin. Fact checker friends of these fake news peddlers or people with vested interest would now spring into action, and they would quickly dismantle the false premise which was actually built on a false narrative or defeasible logic. But these fact checkers would never debate and discuss the original sentiment or original statements. Fake news was planted in order to subvert and hide Nobel laureate French virologist Professor Luc Montagnier's opinion that vaccines are creating mutant variants through antibody-dependent enhancement or ADE. In a conversation, Professor Luc Montagnier has claimed that it is the coronavirus vaccines that are creating mutant variants through a phenomenon called antibody-dependent enhancement or ADE. He thinks that the scientists know this, but they are silent. Professor Montagnier thinks that the coronavirus vaccination program is an unacceptable mistake and mass vaccinations are a scientific error as well as medical error. Professor Luc Montagnier calls it an unacceptable mistake because he thinks that it is the vaccination that is creating the variants or mutants. Professor Luc Montagnier explains that the antibodies created by the vaccine is forcing the virus to find another solution or die. This is where the variants or mutants are getting created. So the mutant variants are a result of vaccination. Professor Luc Montagnier explains that there exists a pattern which tells us that in each country the curve of vaccination is followed by the curve of deaths. This statement is in context of the second wave of coronavirus pandemic. We do not take any ownership of Professor Luc Montagnier's opinion. This is his opinion. However, Nobel laureate French virologist Luc Montagnier has raised serious concerns about vaccine safety. And soon after this, a fake news, a defeasible logic, or a false narrative was inserted, which claims that Professor has stated that the vaccinated people would die within 2 years of their vaccination. No, Professor Luc Montagnier, the French virologist, never claimed this. He never made this statement that vaccinated people would die within next 2 years of their vaccination. This is a fake news, this is a defeasible logic, and this was planted in order to subvert the actual discussion, the original discourse, in order to divert people's attention to something which Professor never claimed, so that at a later point of time, the fact checkers can be brought in order to destroy the entire premise, thereby destroying the credibility of Professor, sabotaging his reputation, and finally subverting the entire original discourse or original sentiment or the original opinion, and diverts people's attention to something which is a complete falsehood. However, Professor raised some serious concerns, and nobody seems to be discussing the serious concerns raised by Professor, although it is his opinion. But people are actually discussing about a statement which he never made. This fake news or defeasible logic was planted by the people with vested interest. Once the defeasible narrative was built around this defeasible logic, and once they understood that the focus of the masses have been shifted to this false narrative, their fact-checker friends sprang into action. And this so-called fact-checkers then quickly dismantled this defeasible premise, which was based on a defeasible logic. But these hypocrites would never discuss the concerns raised by Professor Luc Montagnier, that is antibody-dependent enhancement or ADE. A search result on YouTube reveals this or shows like this. Well, you can clearly see that the fact checkers do not really check the real fact, the real sentiment or the real discourse, that is a serious vaccine safety concern raised by Nobel laureate French virologist Professor Luc Montagnier, that is the concern regarding antibody-dependent enhancement or ADE, which is of course his opinion, his sentiment. We do not take any ownership of his opinion. However, this is a serious concern. Fact checkers do not really check the real fact. They do not participate in the real discourse where they should have actually participated. Enlightened viewers might want to know who are these people with vested interest. The people who planted this fake news or this defeasible logic with an obvious aim to subvert and divert the entire discussion and discourse initiated by Professor Luc Montagnier. Viewers might want to know the identity of the people who have been hit hard by Professor Luc Montagnier's statements. Viewers might ask whether it was the cattle that was hit hard by Professor Montagnier's statements. We are not drawing any conclusion though. Was this fake news planted in order to heckle a Nobel laureate? Viewers might raise this question as well. Viewers might also question the timing and context of this fake news that was planted, and they might argue that this indeed reflects the point that the cattle was hit hard. Well, again, we are not really drawing any conclusion. But this fake news buried the startling claims made by the Nobel laureate Professor Luc Montagnier, and people's attention was diverted successfully from a legitimate discussion and discourse which should have been the top priority in the media. Kindly watch the actual conversation involving Professor Luc Montagnier. The conversation is in French with English subtitles.
Quand on regarde les courbes de l'OMS, depuis qu'on a vacciné en janvier, les courbes de contamination explosent, et également le nombre de morts, notamment des jeunes, oui, avec de thromboses, tout ça. Oui. Quel est votre regard sur cette vaccination massive, puisqu'on est dans une vaccination massive, alors qu'il y aurait des traitements qui marchent, qui fonctionnent et pas chers?
C'est une énorme erreur, n'est-ce pas? C'est une erreur. scientifique, il y a une faute médicale, si on peut dire. Enfin, c'est inacceptable dans l'histoire. On en fera le bilan un jour de tout ça, n'est-ce pas? Car c'est effectivement la vaccination qui a créé les variants. Le virus de Chine, n'est-ce pas, a un vaccin, c'est-à-dire des anticorps produits par un vaccin. Et qu'est-ce qu'il va faire le virus? Ou bien mourir, ou bien trouver une solution. Les nouveaux variants sont vraiment la production, la résultante des vaccinations. Et donc vous voyez toujours dans les pays, même pour là maintenant c'est pareil, la courbe des vaccinations et la courbe des morts maintenant qui suit. Je suis de près, si vous voulez, des expériences qui sont faites in situ, c'est-à-dire sur des patients, des malades, qui sont devenus infectés par le corona après une vaccination. Hein? Et je veux vous montrer que ce qui est apparu, c'est un virus variant qui résiste à la vaccination.
Comment peut-on vacciner en période épidémique? Expliquez-moi.
C'est impensable. Le silence, si vous voulez, beaucoup de gens savent ça. Les épidémiologistes le savent, tout ça. Ce sont des anticorps produits par le virus qui permettent à l'infection d'être plus forte. Vous voyez? C'est ce qu'on appelle les antibody depending enhancement, c'est-à-dire des anticorps qui favorisent une infection. L'anticorps va se fixer sur le virus et à ce moment-là, il y a des récepteurs aux anticorps que nous avons dans nos macrophages, etc., qui vont à ce moment-là piquer le virus, pas par hasard, mais enfin du fait même qu'il est lié à des anticorps. Vous voyez? Il est clair que les nouveaux variants sont créés par la sélection des anticorps produits par la vaccination. D'accord?
Collated data during the second wave of infections in India seems to have closely followed the vaccination drive with a short time lag. Is it a mere coincidence or is it something to worry about? Well, we are not really concluding anything. However, in context of what Professor Luc Montagnier has stated, it is really worrisome. Question is, did we observe the same pattern in India where we witnessed a massive spike in COVID-19 cases within a month? That is during April-May 2021, that is during the second wave. We want to know the reason behind India's second wave. Is it due to the mass vaccination drive in the metro cities or is it something else? We are not concluding anything. There are other aspects as well, the psychological aspect. Today, whenever someone looks at the topic, they tend to think about the fake news associated with this topic and not what Professor Luc Montagnier stated. This is a psychological aberration. This is all part of a cognitive dissonance. Masses are to be blamed for this as well. In this information age, when we are getting bombarded with millions of pieces of information, people tend to think that information is knowledge. Well, information is not knowledge. And it is this lack of understanding which is exploited by the people who wage this information warfare on us. Hence, people must learn to be a good listener and a critical thinker. Thank you. Thanks for watching this video. Kindly share this video with your loved ones and subscribe to this channel.